Keeping up on Seattle area politics is tough. Who has time to sit through a 3-hour council meeting and sort out which decisions will affect you most?
Please vote aye.
Aye.
Well, what if getting caught up on current events was as simple as getting a cup of coffee with some City Hall insiders who know which stories are hot and which are not? Welcome to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. And thank you for being with us on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your very own caffeinated class on civic affairs. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. I am joined once again by Seattle City Council Insights, Kevin Schofield. Kevin, great to see you.
Hey, Brian.
Here we go. Thanks as always to City Grind Espresso, the owners, John and Charlie. They are not just the coffee cart on the first floor of City Hall. They have an incredibly important role as our background noise sponsor. Thanks very much, guys. All right, let's serve it up right now with Right Here, Right Now. All right, Kevin, we're talking downtown safety, and we touched on this last week on the podcast, but just to update what's happening here, one person killed, multiple shootings over a couple of days downtown, 7 people hurt, a lot of concern about this from the city council, but in terms of action, what a lot of people in committee meetings have said, we want something done about this. I'm not quite sure what's going to be different. There's a lot to be said about this.
That's right. And there was a committee meeting of the City Council where Police Chief Best, Carmen Best, made an appearance and talked a little bit about the kinds of things that they're doing in the short term around this. And one of the things she said was that, she recognizes that there needs to be a sustained solution. There needs to be some sustained changes down there. But she was pretty short on details about exactly what would change over the long term. So as they do some short-term things, as they get more police presence there, they drop in a mobile precinct, the question really is, how long is that going to last for, and is this really going to be any different from the previous times that they've done this?
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, last year, in 2019, the police department actually spent more than $200,000 on emphasis patrols along the Pike Pine corridor, where we're talking about here, near 3rd Avenue and Westlake Park, which is around where these shootings have happened. This is all really within blocks of this. So in total, we're talking about a department dedicating 2,700 plus additional officer hours here, 67 full-time weeks over and above that typical police presence in the area. So I don't know, is it a here we go again? I know a lot of focus is on downtown, but I know also other council members are saying, wait a minute, there's crime in other areas too we need to keep an eye on.
That's right. Council member Herbold has mentioned that South Park has seen shootings over the years as well. I think she in particular highlighted the shootings that happened in 2014 there.
Yeah.
Newly elected council member Tammy Morales has actually banded together with King County newly elected council member Guillermo Zalahe to talk about what they can do about violence in South Seattle.
Yeah.
And both of them are raising the same questions like, well, are we paying more attention to downtown than we are to these other areas? Because we have safety issues in a bunch of different places around the city.
Yeah, and I think it really brings up this discussion, once again, Kevin, about restorative justice. It's something King County believes in. It's something Seattle believes in, certainly. This idea of using projects like LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, to try to make sure crimes stop even before they happen, or keep people out of the justice system, I guess, and in that recycling kind of system there. I guess in looking at that, there's some concerns here. Restorative justice, it's had some results, but sometimes there's that here and now. You need to do something immediately, not these long-term type of impacts that LEAD and other programs would go through. Do you see that conflict here too?
I do see that conflict, and this is a very difficult space for our elected officials to work through. On one hand, they have rightly recognized that in today's environment, not only are there racial disparities with who we decide to send to jail versus who we decide to be more lenient with, but there's also just a recognition that what the standard outcomes are of the prison system.
Yeah.
In that people don't get rehabilitated in jail today. So, the best you could say about arresting and jailing people is that you're kicking the can down the road on what you're doing with these folks. And what they've tried to say with the restorative justice effort is let's not do that, but let's really focus on what's going to rehabilitate these folks today through diversion programs, through other programs that really recognize the background they came from, the economic and social issues that they may be wrestling with, and find them a better solution than just throwing them in jail and kicking the can down the road. Yeah. But on the other hand, those programs, we've had some good ones, some early successes with programs like LEAD,
Yeah.
but that really hasn't been scaled up yet. And the city council and the mayor are talking through right now how much do we.
Yeah, they're scrapping over this one.
They're
for
scrapping
sure.
over how quickly to scale it up.
Yeah.
Or whether to kind of do it in stages where we can better understand sort of the metrics of success around it,
Yeah.
and not throw too much money after something that may not be working as well as everybody thinks it does. Because, even at its best, LEAD isn't getting 100% success rates.
No, it's
right?
not. It's not.
So some number of people are going to come out of that and go back on the street. But at the same time, we saw in the city council meeting where Chief Best was there was a lot of angry citizens who showed up and said, look, you need to do something now about this, right? We understand the principles of restorative justice and wanting to rehabilitate folks, but our streets aren't safe today, and it's driving, we heard from restaurant owners and retail store owners. We heard from hotel and apartment managers. We heard from residents downtown, all saying, I don't feel safe on the street. Our customers and our tenants don't feel safe on the street.
Right.
And they're really demanding action right now.
Yeah, and there's that perceived crime versus actual crime or whatever else. But at the end of the day, I really heard a lot of the same arguments that we were listening to a couple of months ago when the city was dealing with this prolific offenders issue. I know some of the people from Wajimaya were reaching out about that, saying, wait a minute, these are people that are getting arrested at the early part of the day, and because they're not actually put in jail, guess what? They'll get out in the afternoon and they will offend again. That's a big part of frustration here too, I think.
Right. And it's interesting that a number of the public commenters at the city council meeting pointed the finger at the city attorney, while Councilmember Herbold, when she was discussing this, tried to sort of point the finger at the King County prosecutor, Dan Satterberg,
who handles felony cases.
Felony cases, and of the three suspects in last week's shooting on this, she noted that two of them had no arrests under city laws,
right.
but arrests and prosecution under the auspices of the King County prosecutor.
Right. So there's a lot still ahead with this, Kevin. And I know we need to move on to some other topics, but when the city really breaks down that funding with LEAD, which is county's involved with that too, when the city breaks down its funding issues with LEAD, I think we're going to hear a lot of these issues again, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on what's happening in terms of safety in downtown Seattle. Another big issue coming up this week for the city council, talking about winter evictions. This is something that council member Shama Sawant has been talking about here. And basically what she's saying is from November to March, let's say you're behind on rent or whatever else, and you probably should be evicted, maybe even the eviction process is underway, those evictions should not happen during those colder months. We've talked about this on the show earlier too. So the council has pushed this forward with a committee vote, and it looks like we're rolling here, I suppose.
Well, it's coming up for a final vote on Monday afternoon,
right?
And we'll see what happens. In committee, they modified it from a ban for those 5 months of the year on all evictions to a ban on a smaller set under the city's just cause eviction law. There's 18 different reasons where you could justifiably evict somebody.
Yep.
And they narrowed down this ban to 8 of them, I think.
Right.
But the key one that they still have in there is banning evictions for non-payment of rent.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason that's an issue is because it deprives the landlords of income. And, we can have a debate about the extent to which large corporate landlords who are managing hundreds or even thousands of units could potentially, manage that. But for small landlords who are really dependent upon that income to pay their own bills month to month, that could be a significant issue. And we've heard from a number of the city council members, the sitting city council members now, that they want to make sure that this doesn't really hurt small landlords. And yet they haven't done anything to this bill to address that.
It's interesting because I've talked with a couple of housing advocates about this and said, well, is there a way to carve out, those smaller landlords or whatever else? And the analogy they used with me was this. let's say you go into a restaurant and it's a smaller one on the side of the road or a bigger one, let's say, that can seat 500 customers or whatever else. Would you want different health inspections for those different places, or would you want something that is the same, such that there's one level, there's an expectation for this across all types of sizes and services here? So that argument, I think, is part of this. I think, at least what we've heard so far, housing advocates really driving a lot of this conversation. What we're hearing so far is let's have a standard that's in place for every landlord out there. But I know a lot of these smaller landlords are going to be potentially really hurt by this if they have to wait 5 months to get some rent for their place.
And another part of this is, are we looking at whether a landlord's actually doing something that's illegal today,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas, in at this point, what they're identifying, the evictions for non-payment of rent, is something where actually the tenant is in the wrong,
Yeah.
right? They may not have any choice. They may not have a source of income because they just lost their job or have got some other family medical situation or something going on, and we can, have compassion for them.
Right.
And that's why, the city and the state and landlord associations have been trying to put together renter assistance programs to try to help people
Look at that
in need
first. Yeah.
around that. But, there really is a distinction between that and health inspections, right? I mean, I suppose you could extend a little further and say, suppose a health inspection costs $2,000, right?
Yeah, okay.
There are big restaurant chains that can afford that.
Got it, okay.
But a small restaurant may not be able to afford a health inspection for $2,000 a pop.
Okay.
Right, in order to keep their permit.
Yeah, this is interesting, though, and in looking at just wrapping up this discussion here, had a vote here to pass this through with the three votes in support of it, Sawant, Morales, and Lewis, but Councilmember Peterson abstained from it. I'm wondering if this is really that litmus test for the council, an early part of the year here, a piece of legislation that Councilmember Sawant is really pushing for. We might just see how far left this council is willing to go.
Right, and particularly given the comments about protecting small landlords, there's certainly some sympathy that at least some of the city council members have for finding a middle ground here. And, it'll be really interesting to see on Monday whether any of them push back. So far, the city and city council haven't published any proposed amendments that they're going to discuss on Monday. That may still show up on Monday. They're supposed to circulate those by midday on Friday, but for anything that's going to come up for a vote on Monday afternoon, so everybody has a chance to consider it first.
Right.
So, we'll see what happens to that. But you're right. I think this could really end up being a key early litmus test for the dynamics between the council members, who's really able to push through their agenda, and how far they're willing to swing to the left.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Kevin. We're going to switch it up to Now Hear This. All right, this is the part of the show where we review some of the activity over the last week and listen into what city leaders are saying about it. I'm going to start talking about the state plan to tax big businesses. This is some legislation introduced by Representative Nicole Macri from the 43rd District up around Capitol Hill in that area. This would allow counties with populations over 2 million to impose an excise tax on business. King County, of course, the only place that really fits that bill. Now, Mayor Jenny Durkin took some questions about this at a press conference soon after the state bill was announced. She was asked if this knocks any sort of City of Seattle plan for a head tax, for example, off the table. Here's how she responded.
Right now, this is the only proposal pending in a legislative body, and it raises approximately $100 million that we could start to spend next year to address this crisis. I'm very interested in making sure that we get real solutions, and so with the county executive supporting this endeavor, hoping as it moves forward, but we have to see how it plays out.
I thought that was a very interesting way to approach this, Kevin. The mayor basically saying, this is all we have right now. We don't have a city plan in front of us, so we're going to go with this. It really seems like battle lines have been drawn with Councilmember Sawant, who is still pushing for a city-level type of tax on big businesses.
Right, and this sort of tax, as we learned last time around, is very complicated, not only for the politics of it, but for getting the policy right.
Yeah.
And I wonder perhaps if this is a bet by some set of local leaders and the state that maybe they'd rather see the King County Council wrestle with this
Yeah,
than
right.
the city council wrestle with this.
Right. It's interesting to see, is that the more trusted body that's going to have a bigger reach out there? We'll have to see how that goes. And I should point out, with House Bill 2907, this is something where counties could enact a 0.1 to 0.2% tax on companies' total payroll. And the idea here being that larger businesses with higher paid workers would be affected. So companies would not have to pay the tax if all of their employees make less than $150,000 per year. If there's a mixture of employees making that or less than that or whatever else, the salaries, the lower paid salaries, would be deducted for purposes of calculating the tax. So they're saying it's different, but I know Reagan Dunn on the county council has said this is a pig with a new paint job, basically.
Well, and I think there's certainly a good case to be made that if a company is paying somebody $150,000 a year or more, they can much more easily afford to pay a few $100s more in a tax, as compared to somebody, a position that is minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right. One of the other interesting aspects of this is if it's countywide, then companies like Amazon don't get to play Seattle and Bellevue against each other.
Yeah.
They're going to get taxed regardless of which side of the lake they hire a new employee.
Yeah.
And that may actually be better for both sides.
Does it seem like one of those situations where it's an end around on what Councilmember Sawant is doing? Because from all I can see, it's full speed ahead on this ballot measure that she's pushing for this citywide kind of tax.
That's right. Sawant is organizing, what her movement, as she likes to call it, to start gathering signatures to put an initiative on the ballot in the fall to put in a new quote-unquote Amazon tax.
Yeah.
I think it might be a gambit a little bit to say that they might come out with something more reasonable, if it's done through the King County Council than a ballot initiative. And, we can look at lots of examples recently of ballot initiatives that prove out the problems of ballot initiatives.
Yeah.
Everything from Initiative 976 and Tim Eyman's earlier things to even just looking at Initiative 124, the hotel workers bill, which was eventually found unconstitutional.
Right.
And in fact, there's still a lawsuit over a piece of it. But the city council went back and rewrote large portions of it so they would pass constitutional muster. Right. It's hard in a lot of cases to get a ballot initiative right, just in terms of how well you can draft legislation. And the deliberative and kind of repetitive process of the city council, the King County Council, tends to get a lot of those issues flagged earlier out into the open where they can figure out how to do a better job of writing it.
Well, just picking up on that, Kevin, with regard to Councilmember Sawant, she said right after this announcement was made about this state bill, she said, we will keep organizing and we will win the biggest possible Amazon tax based on the strength of our movement. So she ain't slowing down on this one, and we'll definitely see what's next there. I should also point out Expedia throwing some weight behind this as well, so we'll really see on this. So a lot still ahead here in terms of what Councilmember Sawant is doing with regard to an Amazon tax, as she calls it. We'll keep following up on that. But another piece when it comes to progressive revenue, ideas of trying to build community wealth. We've heard a lot of this from Councilmember Morales as well. She's going to have a meeting very soon on this to talk about this issue. Kevin, it seems like we're at the high level with this discussion right now.
Yeah, so Councilmember Morales has spent a lot of time recently talking about a theme for her office and her committee this year around what she calls building community wealth, which seems to be about ensuring that we can preserve communities within Seattle, make sure that we fight back against displacement of both individuals and community-based businesses.
Yeah, this is a big one and very much at a high level right now, but a Thursday meeting coming up, and I talked with her office a little bit about this. Basically a roundtable with businesses, artists, filmmakers, anyone who's really part of the economic development community to talk about building community wealth, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working when it comes to people staying in their respective communities. And I think when the rubber meets the road on this one, Councilmember Morales, when she was a candidate, was talking a lot about this on the campaign trail, trying to work through the Equitable Development Initiative, a fund that's actually set aside by the city for communities at high risk of displacement. I'm not sure what she's going to be able to do there, what she's going to be able to promise in terms of dollars for the EDI, but I really think that's her thrust going forward, to not only talk about this, but to try to put some money where her mouth is, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll see what comes out of it. It's early in the discussion. She's brought it up in a committee. She intends to bring it up certainly in her next committee meeting and probably for several ones after that as she and her staff focus down on what are kind of more specific things that they can do around this.
Definitely so. Let's keep track on that, and let's start wrapping up our show with What's Next? All right, so Kevin, we're going to start wrapping up by talking about what's happening with the Seattle Police Officers Guild. Negotiations in the process right now. Where are we with this? It looks like a few of the different sides who have been arguing quite a bit over this might be on some common ground coming up here. What have you seen?
So in March, the city is going to start its next round of negotiations with SPOG, the Police Officers Union, where they have a collective bargaining agreement. And this is the one that a year and a half ago got the city in trouble with Judge Robart, the consent decree, because he didn't like some of the rollbacks to police accountability that were represented in the contract that they negotiated. Well, it's time to go back to the bargaining table again. The Curtin contract was backdated for several years, and it expires at the end of this year. So this is an important year for them to go back to the table and work out the next round. So they started this process late fall. They have to pre-announce it. They have to hold a public hearing and get a bunch of information from the public about what the public thinks are priorities for the next round of contract negotiations.
Right.
They did that. They got a bunch of feedback. And so right now in front of the council, working its way through its process, is a resolution that writes down what they heard and those priorities. Earlier this week, they had a committee hearing with representatives from the three civilian oversight bodies for the police, the Office of Police Accountability, the Office of the Inspector General for Safety, and the Community Police Commission. And all three of those were saying pretty much the same thing as each other, and they all echoed pretty much the same things that we heard from the public around the issues that they really think are important. And they're ones that we've heard before in this process, and they're ones that Judge Robart, objected to as well.
I think it's one of those situations, though, and we've talked about this earlier. The city can ask for whatever it wants to when it comes to actually having some leverage within these negotiations. Does it have some ground to stand on, the city of Seattle, in this?
I think their strongest weapon is public opinion. And whether the public supports strong accountability with the police force. And that's particularly tricky, just coming back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, at a point in time where police department is understaffed. And we really want them out there doing more and dealing with more of these safety issues. There are various factions of the residents of Seattle who have different views across the spectrum on this. There are certainly communities in Seattle whose members have been over-policed, which is how we got in the situation with the consent decree in the first place. And they don't, certainly with very good reason, don't want to end up in a situation where they're over-policed again. But we do have public safety issues on our streets. And so the city council is a little bit caught in the middle on that. But again, public opinion is their strongest weapon. Their big weakness right now is probably the consent decree, because Judge Robart found them out of compliance with it. And to get back into compliance, it's pretty clear they're going to need changes in the contract. So knowing that, if you were the lead negotiator for the police officers union, and you're walking into that negotiating room, knowing that the other side has to get these things, you can ask for anything you want.
It's going to be interesting because while there has been a big battle, should these be open negotiations? They are not open negotiations, but this is the one city union where you actually do have a public hearing process attached to it. And I think that's interesting because we're going to hear a lot of different opinions, certainly from the CPC, the citizens group there that's really interested in this, but we're going to hear a lot of back and forth. And I think some of these other voices who have been so concerned about downtown safety, we've heard a lot from them over the past week or so. I think we're going to hear from them again, too.
Right. And some of these issues, state law actually, for example, gives the police union support. So
That's right. With regard to their negotiations,
So state law mandates that the police officers have the right of arbitration.
Yep.
Right? They can give it up. They can negotiate it away, which is their choice.
Yeah.
But they don't have to.
Yeah.
Right? So again, they could ask whatever they want for it. And they could certainly negotiate the terms of exactly how it works.
Yeah.
But the city can't force them to give it up.
Yeah, and I know organized labor is very important to a lot of different council members. It's one of the committees that the council works with too. So really balancing that need for well-organized labor, their right to assemble in that way, balancing the need for public safety in our area, and trying to balance something that has been going on so long, this consent decree process for the past 8 years almost now. So a lot still ahead with that. But Kevin, we really do need to wrap up the show here. One last piece, probably the most important story we've ever covered.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about what name do you give the Seattle Major League Hockey franchise, which is starting up next year. There's a lot of chatter about the Kraken, a mythical beast, if you will, squid-like creature out there. Any thoughts on that? One of the hockey bloggers out there said, "Oh, this is what it's going to be." There was some pushback about it. Any thoughts about the Kraken? What do you think?
I'm all for gooey ducks. I think they should be the gooey ducks.
He likes his gooey ducks. The other interesting was a lot of people were talking about the sockeyes. You know, it's like a hockey fight or whatever else, and then you get the fish and all that. But as it turns out, there is a romance writer, lives in the Shelton area, who actually began a fictional series about the Seattle Sockeyes, a hockey team up in this area. Wrote 9 books about it. She lives down in Shelton, Jamie Davenport. She wants to make sure that there's no block from her. She did buy the rights to the name, of course, but she's actually bought in for season tickets too. So will it be Sockeyes? Will it be the Kraken? Will it be the Seattle Totems? We're not quite sure, but I do know that there's a lot still ahead. So some fishy rumors hopefully being put to rest soon.
The suspense is killing me.
I know. We'll see how it goes. All right. So thanks for joining us on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thank you very much, Kevin, once again.
Thanks, Brian.
And the next time you want to know what's going on in local politics, give us a listen and find out what's brewing. Reach us via email at seattlenewsviewsandbrews@gmail.com. Subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, iHeartRadio, we're there too. And hey, thanks for listening.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.